Yeah, so I may have not broadcasted it, but it's been about maybe 4 to 5 weeks that I started another YouTube channel. It's called Tech Conception, and my co-host is Odie Mbuntu. I can't say his last name. It's a duo in which the channel focuses on the business importance of tech, why we do tech in the first place. And so the channel Tech Conception is primarily focused on the aspects of business that's behind the technology of what we build. This video is going to be a partial, if not absent, reaction video to a popular episode that we had with Jamie Edwards. And let me just run it.
But I'd say just as many of those people stay too long and they're so committed to the project that long after they realize this is like not even just frustrating, this is like a horrible project for me, they're still there 5 years later.
This episode is special. This is our very first guest on Tech Conception, Jamie Edwards. All right. And we have our co-host, Odie Mbegbu.
Yeah, you got it actually, Mbebu. Yeah, it's fine.
Okay. So we have Jamie Edwards. Hi, Jamie. And the motivation for this session is to go back to the premise or the motivation for why Odie and I started Tech Conception. And very briefly, the motivation for starting the Tech Conception YouTube channel was to shed a light or bring more focus to the business side, the business consideration for why we develop software in the first place. Over the years, as I've been maturing my skill set as a professional developer, um, I'm learning more and more to one, be a politician as I negotiate compromises in order to ship software. And I'm not sure if there really is a two. Really manage the software development efforts, which is people, right? And trying to manage business expectations of the business. And so far, what I've learned is, at least for me, one of the optimal ways of managing business expectations is to truly understand the business objectives and review that periodically to make sure that the business stakeholders, investors, we're all on the same page, we are aligned. So that's a brief motivation. Hope that wasn't too long. I'm going to pause for a second for anybody to add anything onto it. Jamie, again, you have your own YouTube channel. It is Healthy Developer. And my understanding, this is, please correct me, is you tend to target developers that are somewhat mid-career and help them grow their career and help them navigate the political arena of the software development industry. Would that be fair to say, or would you like to touch on that?
Yeah, it's totally fair to say. No, you nailed it, Scott. Yeah, I try to reach really anybody that I feel like the content would be valuable for, but generally, like you said, it's kind of people who are mid to late career. Really just, briefly for people who may be watching your channel and aren't familiar with me. I've been in the industry. I'm kind of a dinosaur at this point for about 25 years. The first half of my career, I worked for various companies as an employee, in developer and architect positions. And then when I moved down here, I'm in Austin, Texas today. About 15 years ago, I switched into consulting. And when I switched into consulting, I ended up just through no choice of my own, just through kind of how life went and that job went. I ended up working with like over 25 different companies, just doing various projects. And in that time, I just realized that, from my perspective, the average mid to late term developer was very disgruntled and very frustrated. And yeah. And I felt like the first reason I made my channel really was to help people understand that they're not alone, that they're not crazy. I'm sure the two of you have experienced when you're on a project and, you're in scrum meetings or meetings with the management and everybody acts like everything's fine. And, nobody wants to really bring up big problems because everybody, is trying to, again, politically make sure everybody like, oh, the project's on track, everything's fine. But then you take people out to lunch or you talk to them over Slack or just privately, and then you find out what they really think about the project. And often there's a lot of problems. So that was my first purpose. My second purpose, today I have kind of two jobs. I work part-time as a consultant in the morning, and then in the afternoon, I do career coaching now. And my career coaching is really just to help people accomplish common goals in their career. I won't go through all of them. I don't need to make this into a sales pitch. This is about your channel. But, one of the things we were talking about a little bit before we started this episode was just kind of the background, like you were saying, Scott, of Tech Conception and your purpose. And I've talked in a few of my videos about what I believe helps developers grow into more senior positions. And one of those things is understanding the business better and having an appreciation for, hey, we're not just here to code because it's fun, because we went to some conference and saw some new buzzword or saw something in a YouTube video. But at the end of the day, it's got to make a company profit and it's got to satisfy customer needs. And so the fact that the two of you have decided to make a channel, specifically focusing on helping developers kind of develop, no pun intended, the ability to care about that in the first place and really put a value on it, I think that's great. It's sorely needed in the industry. And so, again, super happy to come here on your channel and just talk to you a little bit about starting out with that.
Cool. Appreciate it.
Yeah. So, Jamie, one of the things, like what you said last, was very, very important. Like one of the ways that developers become senior, they grow in their career, is when they start to think of the business. And in some of our previous episodes, I spoke to Scott and I was explaining my own experience as well. Being that new developer that wants to be on the latest version of Node.js and all of that stuff, I did that. And then any little thing I came across, I would be like, oh, we need to rewrite this. And, or why is it that management can't see these problems in the code that we're doing? And why can't they give us 6 months to revamp this internal system and stuff like that? And for the life of me, I could never understand, some of these decisions, especially when I see them taken by people who I consider like senior developers, maybe people who have the same experience I do with code, but have been in the industry for much longer. And, working at the same company for close to 6 years, I got into those senior positions and I was now the one having to make those calls to say, no, we can't rewrite this. There's no time to do this. There's no time to do that. And I remember that feeling, right? And I remember that I was like, oh, because it dawned on me in that moment. And I think that's part of the motivation behind this channel, that we like to think of coding as a single enterprise, like a single developer who is talented enough can sit down and start writing code. Yes, that happens. You have the Notches of the world. You have the Linus Torvalds. That does happen. But more often than not, software engineering is a collaborative sport, right? It deals with lots of people. So if you're going to do anything significant in the world of software engineering, you have to learn how to work with other people. You have to learn how to move a business and stuff like that. I was watching a video recently where the inventor of Ethernet, right? He became a billionaire. And he said that he became rich not because he invented Ethernet, but because he was selling Ethernet. And that, flicked the bulb in my head that you can come up with the best technology. It doesn't mean anything if you don't have a good way to sell it, right? So I think one of the questions I would like to ask you, Jamie, is like, what practical steps do you like normally give junior developers who come to you? Because I'm pretty sure they ask you this question all the time. Like, what practical things what examples, what exercises can they do to start developing that business centric mindset in terms of software engineering?
Wow, great question. And I'll flip it over to Scott in a minute here too, because I'm curious what he thinks too. Well, I'll say, it depends a little bit on the type of position that a developer is working for in the company. I having been a consultant for much of my career, I had to actually develop the ability to join a company that I was going to be working at for some undetermined amount of time. I might be there for 3 weeks. I might be there for a year. It just depended on, how the engagement went. And pretty quickly try to understand like the history of the company, its people, at least in the development organization. So really like one of the things, and I, again, many of my clients, my career coaching clients, they're a little more experienced and they're not totally junior, but they could be, 3 to 5 years into their career. So they're still kind of, they could be on the earlier side, I guess. But, I think I often liken it to like, at least in the United States in high school, if you go to public high school, after summer every year, you start a new year and you show up and you remember some of the people, but like, everything seems kind of new. You're trying to make your way to the new, classes you got to be to, and you're meeting a new teacher and you're meeting all these new classmates, and like everybody's new and you're trying to just kind of make sense of everything. As a consultant, it's kind of like you're doing that, but within companies. You join a company, you know nobody. So you have to find some people to kind of make sense of where you're at, there. So a lot of my clients that I have, and again, it depends on what they hired me for and what I'm helping them with. I'll, as part of their coaching, kind of try to understand, not like the org chart per se, because I mean, we don't have time to know everybody in the whole company, but let's say you're working at this is just kind of making something up, but let's say you're working at a company that has like 3 primary products, and one of them has software as a part of delivering that product, and that's the project that you're on, as an employee or a consultant. Just understanding, okay, for that given product, like how do they actually make their money? What's their sales force look like? Like, do they have their own salespeople? Do they have separate salespeople? Like, how long have they been developing it? Was it bought out by some other company? Did they originally develop it themselves? All that kind of history of how the company and its team got to the place it's at. Now, that's the stuff I'm often trying to figure out as a consultant, but it'll often take me, months, let's say, to get that information, because, while I'm there, I'm trying to write code, or I'm trying to do architecture, or I'm trying to lead a team. I can't spend, every waking minute on the job necessarily, looking into the background of the company. But that's kind of what I usually recommend to people. I mean, there's a lot of stuff, but just at least when you're first joining a company, try to dig in, to the level that they'll be transparent with you to, the history of the company, the history of the team you're on. Partially because, especially if you come in as a consultant, and I know, Scott, again, I'm going to flip it over to you in a second there. I would often be brought in to help people with like Agile or DevOps and things like that. And sometimes the company had done or thought they'd done, Agile or DevOps before, and they had a really bad experience. So you had, certain managers and certain developers who were just like, yeah, we tried that, it didn't work. We're not going to do that again. And so if you don't know that, and you join a company and you're all rah about DevOps and Agile, you're going to look kind of like an idiot because you're like pitching something they're already frustrated with. Now, that doesn't mean you can't do it, but like, and again, depending on the purpose of the call, we may not get into this, but that's one thing I help people with too, is like, it's, in my opinion, the hardest part of software development is people management and relationship management. And so, learning how do I take people that are predisposed to be against some particular aspect of software because of a bad experience, and kind of give it a second chance and try to learn. That's a whole skill, in and of itself.
True.
How about you, Scott? Like, I know you started out, I know you do a lot of architecture work now, but I know you started out bringing a lot of QA and testing stuff into companies. I'm sure you have an opinion on, trying to get people to see the value of that in light of business and things like that.
once I open up my mouth, you guys are going to have to shut me up. Because I'll just keep going. It's going to be a fire
man,
hose.
go for it.
Yeah, all who's bad. Just go for it.
All
Yeah.
right, all right. So frustration dump, brain dump, mind dump. If the original question is what advice would I provide to someone junior in their career, is that accurate?
Yes.
There's a couple items. One is understand what's important to you versus what you're being employed to do, and minimize the conflict of interest. I'm guilty of this, right? It's a catch-22. It's kind of an oxymoron. In order to get hired, the gatekeepers are usually people that are clueless when it comes to what software engineering takes. So you have to learn the latest framework of JavaScript. You have to, now I think we're doing Maui for mobile development cross-platform. So you have to say you have experience in that and sprinkle that on your resume. And you have to, based on 24 hours in a day, you have to try to cram in some type of legitimacy in your experience and then throw it on your resume just to get an opportunity and just to try to stay relevant. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges right now from junior to even senior is who are you really serving? You're being hired to serve the customers and your employer. But the way that things are organized, it's hard to get in to even attempt to serve them if you don't serve yourself in order to get that position or opportunity to serve other people. So that's the part that even I'm struggling with, where, yeah, I've been provided opportunities to help employer or organization XYZ. And I'm like, well, they're using these antiquated technologies, and ultimately what needs to get done is them delivering on their business objectives. So I'm just going to be Scott Nimrod and I'm going to do things my way. And of course, I usually do a thorough job, I think, and things are highly testable, I think. But you know what? The bulk people that maintain that business when I'm not going to be here, they're going to struggle with what I injected into that business. And who am I really helping? Myself or them? And the answer is I'm helping myself. And is that really ethical? Right? So it's a strong coming to Jesus talk about who are you really in business for? Are you really trying to help this organization? Or are you really just trying to help yourself? And if it's the latter part, maybe you should have an honest talk with yourself, right? And that's something that I struggle with, just to be relevant and just to have money hitting my bank account so I can pay my own bills. It's a catch-22. I'll just briefly say it again. You have to decorate your resume with things that really aren't useful to the business that you're trying to serve just to help that business, and it's a catch-22. All right, so that's one. I could pause. We could talk about that part, or I can move on to another one.
Yeah, so I have a question around it. Do you think the incentives are the reason, like the incentives are misaligned somehow? And the reason I bring this up is because in my own experience, right? I remember I was made the head of a subdivision, a technical head of a subdivision in the company. And I remember, so up until that point, right, I used to make technical presentations. So, this is what we did. This is what we added to the platform. We were building a platform at the time. And I remember the very first time I went into one of those meetings, and my boss at the time, who was like the CEO of the company, was like, I don't want to see anything technical. I just want to know how much we are making from this thing. Show me how much did we make last quarter, how much are we making this quarter, and all that kind of stuff. And I remember vividly that the thought processes that went through my head, where it was like all of a sudden my incentives were all flipped. My incentives were not how well is the platform performing. It was now how much is the platform bringing in. And I think that was one of the, it sounds cruel, it sounds like ridiculous, but that was one of the first catalysts in my mind that started going off like, okay, how do we get to the first dollar, right? The first dollar in income. How do we multiply that first dollar in income and all of that kind of stuff? So the question I'm asking is to both of you, Jamie or Scott, anyone. Do you think it's because the incentives for a developer who is hired in 2022 or 2023 rather, to, hey, come, we need you to work on Node.js for us. We need you to work on this platform for us. Those incentives are different from the incentives of, say, his manager, for example, who is focused on, bringing in revenue or bringing in profit?
I can just throw in a little bit of my own thought on that. It's a great question. I actually think you're bang on, which is that almost everybody's incentives are different, and that's one of the most challenging things of the job in my experience, is trying to figure out what the hell those are. So like one of the videos I did on my channel last year was about how to help, it was kind of trying to help people persuade various people on their projects. So it's kind of about persuasion. And again, this is something I think I inherently kind of maybe picked up a little bit of before I became a consultant, but it wasn't until I became a professional IT consultant that I really saw like other consultants formally kind of do this. And it became, a big part of the job, which is like, when I got on consulting projects, sometimes I'd be on the project with like, let's say 4 or 5 other men, maybe occasionally there's a woman there, but it seemed to be a very male dominated field, at least here in Austin at the time. And we'd be on the project and go out to lunch or something like that. And we'd meet with a person from the consulting company who was sort of like an engagement manager. I don't know if you guys know what that is, but it's usually a person who's sort of like oversees. They're not like on the project day to day, but they kind of are making sure the relationship with the client and the consulting company is good. And so they'll send them like fruit baskets and take them out to lunch and, talk, just make sure everything's cool, right? They're just making sure the relationship's good. And sometimes, we'd be talking to them and we describe some issue with the project, like, oh, John, the manager, and I'm just making up a name, seems to be frustrated about this thing. And, Mary, the PM, seems to be frustrated about this other thing. And the engagement manager would be like, oh, yeah, well, he's up for a promotion next quarter and she's being measured on whether, this thing that she pitched was a good idea 2 years ago is actually going to be successful. And so right there, all of a sudden you're hearing, oh, like there's this whole other objective that they're being measured on. I had no idea what it is. And as soon as you hear that, all of a sudden it colors a little bit of like, now when you go to pitch an idea to them, when you go to sell your own idea, when you go to, just like your example, Odie, of doing a presentation, knowing your audience as a developer, not even just in meetings, but just even in you're sitting down with somebody, you're just talking to them, doing pair programming. When I've come in as a consultant, if I sit with another developer, I have to kind of understand what has that developer been through on the project. Like, because again, I'm as a consultant, at least I'm usually not an employee of the company. They have their own developers. They've been there for years. That developer could be like, maybe 6 months ago, they got in trouble or had some, issues with their manager because of some technology that they pitched and they were late on their estimates or something classic like that. And so they're sitting with me and what's in the back of their head might be, I hope this guy isn't going to press me to do anything that's going to get me in more trouble with my employer because I'm already on the hot seat because of this thing that just happened 6 months ago. So, I'll flip it over to you in a second, but one thing I'd say is emotional intelligence, common catchphrase you hear about all the time. I think this is something that developers need to prize more. They need to actually have, start to develop, and again, unintended, I keep saying develop, but they need to build the ability to try to kind of sense what people are worried about and ferret that out a little bit better. Because just like the two of you are saying, everybody on a project has different motivations. They're measured different ways. They have different, experiences and pains and paranoias. And the more you understand that, the better chance you're not going to, step on a landmine. Maybe that's politically incorrect these days, but the less of a chance that you're going to do something that's going to get you in a lot of trouble with somebody else, where your intention, I mean, just like we've talked about in other videos, Scott, I've had you on my channel, when you join a company, your intention is always just, you're trying to do a good job. You're trying to get paid. You're trying to, do what they asked you to do. But as you're there, it's people, right? It's people. And that always makes everything complicated. And I'm one of them too. And so I always make everything complicated in some areas too. Yeah.
True. So Scott, what do you think about that?
There's a couple things. One is, I'm not sure if Scott Blushing was the one that coined it. Probably not. But in my experience, the majority of problems really are people problems. And something that I'm sure people that have worked with me have heard me say over and over again is, whoever you add to a project, they're going to try to force themselves to be relevant to that project. And it may result in diminishing returns, right? Mm-hmm. If you have a small project and you hire 3 architects for this one small project, I promise you, all 3 architects are going to try to be relevant to that one small project. And it's likely to cause diminishing returns.
Yep.
Something else, when you ask about incentives, absolutely. At this point in my journey through my professional practice, I still believe that culture is the fabric of doing anything. And with that said, I honestly believe that leadership is held accountable for culture. Either they entertain it or they change it, right? I do believe that. I haven't really been in a leadership position at that level, but I see the consequences when it's not being executed. And so, for example, I've been in organizations where it's kind of like a government agency. Use it or lose it.
Right.
If you don't use this funding to keep all these people busy, then they're going to be looking at you weird when they start to plan out the next budget. And for me, I'm like, so what's more important, like shipping this on the deadline and getting customers and hitting our business objectives, increasing profit, reducing costs? Isn't that the priority right now? And I think the answer is, it depends on what level of management, right? And that's what I've learned very, very recently, where there's a higher priority to protect your reputation, even if you're not really doing something that's conducive to the longevity of the business. And that was very interesting for me to observe. And yeah, so that's one. Maybe I should just pause there.
No, like, I totally resonate with what you said. I also worked at a consulting company for a period of time, and we were taught explicit things like, when you are in a code review with the client's software engineers, you should never make assertions, right? You should always ask questions. Oh, could we do it this way? Could we do it that way? And initially, being part of a consulting firm, reading through all these guidelines, I was like, why are they trying to police this? Until one day where one of them, I think somebody in the company, had this back and forth with one of the internal with one of the developers of the customer, and that led to this whole long thread. The irony is that the consultant was right, but he couldn't read that. First of all, this person is working and he wasn't compensated properly, so he has a gripe to feel, and these other developers from these other teams, they don't really care about this project that the consultant is on. So you can easily see how, even though the consultant was 100% in the right, he got the absolute worst outcomes. First of all, even the changes he was asking for were never made, and he turned out to be the bad guy at the end of the day. So it's like, it wasn't even effective. And, it goes back to what Jamie was saying, is understanding people's incentives. I think it's something that is very difficult to do, because especially when you get to a company, the HR tells you, we want you to do this when you join us, and then you join, and all of a sudden your boss is telling you, okay, these are the milestones I want you to hit. It's very difficult to step out of your position in that moment and look at it from, from a bird's eye view, to say, okay, for me to get this thing I want to get done, I really need to understand other people's motivations, how other systems interact, and all this kind of stuff. So yeah, it's interesting to think about it. But yeah, I remember Scott complaining. I can't remember the day he was complaining. He was like,
every day.
I'm tired of this software engineer. I hate playing politics, even though I know I'm right and everything. And I'm always the voice telling him, wait, calm down. Yes, you're right, but if you really want to get anything done, I think there is a core fundamental principle, right? If you want to get anything done with people, right? Or let me put it this way, politics, what we call politics, right, is the art of getting things done when there are different people with different interests and different motivations and stuff like that. So some of the tactics that, say, a scientist would use, right, in diagnosing a problem, solving a problem, is completely different from the way a politician would go about it, right?
Right.
Not to bring up the former president of the United States, but he wasn't really a technocrat, right? So I'm talking about Donald Trump. He wasn't someone you could say, oh, I read a paper from Donald Trump. That doesn't exist. But he was very good at pressing people's buttons, right? He was very good at saying things that would rile up a section of the country while making another section of the country, vouch for him. And that's how he got the position. So yeah, I think maybe there are some, so what I'm saying is, maybe as a developer, there are some things we can learn, emotional intelligence, like you mentioned, that can help us really understand how to work with people and how to strategize. And I know I'm using big words now, and I hate it when I do that, but but like how to arrange situations that give you the best outcome, because it's not exactly clear to me that being right will always get you the right outcome. It's not clear to me that that's always the case in most companies or in most company settings.
So Jamie, I'm not sure if you want to respond to that, but I do have a question for you if you do choose to respond. Well, regardless if you respond or not.
Go ahead, Scott. I have a little something, but please, go ahead.
Okay. In your experience and in your coaching, because you have a coaching program, right? Is there ever such thing as a personality type that just doesn't mesh well with software development?
Wow, that's a good question. Well, I mean, you may be surprised to know this, but I just learned this year through a variety of some self-discovery through a variety of things, and really in the last couple of years, that like software development probably wasn't the best job for me. I've been doing it for 25 years, but there's some things about my personality. I'm very creative. Creativity tends to be threatening and punished in corporate America or across much of the country. At the high echelons of companies, everybody likes to talk about the value of creativity. But generally, if you're an individual contributor, people don't want too much creativity. They want you to, do what's within your box. Don't step outside too much. Don't do anything that's too innovative. Otherwise, you're going to threaten people. Anyway, so I guess all I'm saying is, I think before I answer your question by saying yes, the short answer is yes. There are personality types I think that probably would have a harder time being successful in software development. I think there's plenty examples of people, like myself, who maybe are not the optimal personality type to be a developer, but as humans, we tend to rise above our situation. We tend to, I have, as I've talked about all over my channel, I've got 3 kids and I'm married. I've been the sole provider. I had to do what I had to do to provide for my family. And so if that meant, dealing with crazy political situations, of which I've talked about a lot on YouTube, that's what I had to do, but yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that both of you are talking about, this is to respond kind of to Odie and to you, Scott, and this last thing Odie said, which was great. There's this quote, and this is pretty cliche, but I think it kind of captures what we're talking about, which is, my wife has had this, she's one of these, she's got like magnets on the refrigerator with just kind of little sayings that she likes to think about here and there. And I always think they're really good ones. And one of the ones she has, I had to bring up the quote because I forgot what it is. I've literally got it on a browser here. I searched for it. Is life isn't about waiting for the storm to pass. It's about learning how to dance in the rain. And it's a little cliche, but when we're sitting here talking to hopefully developers of any experience, maybe they're a little bit more junior, about having an aptitude for the business, kind of like we talked about at the beginning of the call, learning everybody what their motivations are and all that stuff. It's really hard to do that when you're also trying to get your deliverables done and get your code past code reviews and troubleshoot crazy esoteric issues in a third-party library that take you a week, and all that. And so, I kind of, my first boss that I had right out of college, he came from his parents were, or his dad was he was a military brat. You've kind of heard that saying, like he traveled all over the country because his dad was in the military. And he always made like war analogies to the software project. Now, if you've really been in war, that's a joke, right? Because we're safe. We're sitting here drinking coffee. We're typing on a keyboard. Like the amount of threat we're dealing with is hardly anything.
Sorry to cut you. Aside from that, right? We have so lowered the bar for software that things fail all the time and nobody dies, and we don't even take it as serious. And I think it's one of the things that, I'm sorry to cut you, but it's one of the things that annoys Scott the most is that the people don't take testing, like he takes testing very seriously, right? Because quality is at the top of his mind. But the lackadaisical attitude towards software developers towards software developers, right, is a complete absolute joke compared to like military and war. Like if software developers were soldiers, a lot of people would be dead. Let's just keep it a buck here.
Yeah, I agree. And I mean, I think that's great. Basically, to summarize, in light of what you just said there, I guess if I were to try to speak directly to, whoever might be watching this video, I just encourage, you, whoever you are, that when you join a project, it's going to be challenging. There's going to be a lot of things that for the entire time you're at that company may be really frustrating. And you can't change them. There's literally nothing you can do to change them. They're inherent in the culture. They're inherent in the project. That doesn't mean you can't find success within that project if you decide how you're going to measure it. Meaning, like, maybe you join a project and they hired you to, I don't know, improve their testing or something like that, or beef up their test suite. And what it takes to do that. You've seen abysmal test coverage. There's like 10 things right out the gates you could help them with within the first week of being there. But the reality is, because of politics and the people and the budget and how people think things should be done, maybe only 2 of those things of those 10 are really going to be something that you can even achieve and try to do while you're there. Well, if you just accept that and go, hey, for the time I'm here, these are the 2 things I can do. That's it. And just do the best job with those 2 you can. Maybe find some other part of the project. Like, okay, maybe I don't get to do the 10 things I normally love to do, but I'm going to use that time that I would normally spend, pushing on these other 8 things that they're just not going for, to improve my communication skills or practice presenting to people, or, things like that. Yeah, go ahead, Scott. You're going to respond to that.
Or someone like me would say, you know what? My software development practice or my career is way more important than this mediocre organization. I'm out.
So let's pause that and let's stop sharing. And let's go back to my StreamYard session and say that, yeah, that was about 2/3 or maybe even 3/4 of the Tech Conception episode. That was second to last episode that we had. We had our last episode on Saturday that is doing very well, and that one's just with Odie and I. And that's it. So you got a good portion of the other YouTube channel, Tech Conception. If you want to listen to the whole episode, I'll leave a link in the description. And yeah, check it out. Tech Conception. Peace. Adios. I'm out.